The entire room went silent when the billionaire's daughter suddenly stood up. For 3 years, the young woman had not taken a single step. Doctors had told her father to stop hoping. Specialists from around the world had tried everything money could buy, yet nothing changed. But now, in the middle of a private rehabilitation room, she was trembling on her feet while a quiet single dad stood in front of her and whispered, "Don't look at your legs. Look at me." Nobody knew that the man giving her hope had once survived missions that most people never heard about. Nobody knew why he had walked away from his military past. And nobody could have imagined that helping this young woman would completely change 2 broken families forever. Before we begin, make sure you stay until the end, because the final lesson of this story is something you may carry with you for the rest of your life. And if stories about courage, kindness, and second chances touch your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. 3 years earlier, 22-year-old Emily Carter had everything people dreamed of. She was the only daughter of billionaire businessman Richard Carter, the founder of one of the largest technology companies in the country. She had grown up in a mansion surrounded by beautiful gardens, expensive cars, private schools, and every opportunity money could provide. But Emily never cared much about the luxury. She loved photography, helping at children's charities, and spending quiet afternoons with her father. Richard was a busy man, but Emily was the one person who could make him shut off his phone and listen. Then one rainy evening, everything changed. Emily was driving home from a charity event when another vehicle lost control on the wet road. The collision lasted only seconds, but the consequences would last for years. Emily survived, but her spinal cord was severely damaged. When Richard arrived at the hospital, he found his daughter unconscious beneath a blanket of medical equipment. The doctors told him she might never walk again. Richard refused to accept it. He hired specialists from New York, Los Angeles, London, and Switzerland. He paid for private rehabilitation centers. He brought in neurological experts, physical therapists, surgeons, and alternative medicine specialists. Every new doctor gave him a little hope, and every failed treatment took a little more of it away. Emily went from being an energetic young woman to someone who barely wanted to leave her room. She hated people looking at her with pity. She hated hearing the word miracle. And most of all, she hated watching her father spend millions trying to buy something money could not guarantee. One afternoon, Richard entered her room carrying a small box of photographs. "I found these in the attic," he said. Emily didn't look up. "Put them away, Dad." Richard sat beside her. "These are from your 10th birthday. I remember. You were wearing that ridiculous yellow dress." Emily gave a faint smile. "You said I looked like a sunflower." "You did." For a few seconds, father and daughter smiled. Then Emily looked toward the window. "I wish I could go back to that girl." Richard's smile disappeared. "You're still that girl." "No, Dad. I'm not." The words broke something inside him. Richard reached for her hand. "You're my daughter. That's enough." Emily pulled her hand away. "It's not enough for me." Richard left the room with tears in his eyes. That night, he sat alone in his office surrounded by awards, business certificates, and photographs of his daughter. He had conquered markets. He had built companies. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals. But he couldn't make his daughter stand. And for the first time in his life, Richard Carter felt completely powerless. Across town, in a small neighborhood far from the billionaire's mansion, a single father named Daniel Brooks was finishing dinner with his 8-year-old son, Noah. Daniel was 38 years old. He wasn't rich. He didn't own a luxury car or a giant house. He lived in a modest home with a small backyard, a second-hand truck, and a kitchen where Noah's drawings covered the refrigerator. But Daniel had something most people didn't know about. Years earlier, he had served in the United States Navy SEALs. He had completed missions in places he never talked about. He had survived injuries, exhaustion, fear, and situations where one wrong decision could cost a life. But Daniel rarely mentioned his military past. To Noah, he was simply Dad. One evening, Noah looked at his father while eating dinner. "Dad?" "Yeah? Why don't you talk about the Navy anymore?" Daniel paused. "Because some things are better left in the past." "Were you a hero?" Daniel smiled. "No." Noah frowned. "Then what were you?" Daniel looked at his son. "I was someone who tried to bring people home." That answer stayed with Noah. After leaving the military, Daniel had struggled to adjust to ordinary life. Loud noises bothered him. Crowded places made him uncomfortable. He missed the brotherhood of his team. Most of all, he carried memories he couldn't explain. Then his wife died after a sudden illness, leaving Daniel to raise Noah alone. His life became simple. Work. School. Dinner. Homework. Bedtime. Repeat. Daniel didn't complain. He had learned something during his military years: you don't need to control everything. You just need to control what you can do next. One morning, Daniel received a call from a private rehabilitation facility. A friend who worked there told him they needed someone with experience in advanced physical conditioning and recovery training. Daniel almost refused. Then he heard the patient's name. Emily Carter. He knew nothing about her personally. But when he arrived at the Carter estate, he immediately understood that this wasn't an ordinary rehabilitation case. Security guards stood at the entrance. Luxury vehicles lined the driveway. The mansion looked more like a hotel than a home. Daniel stepped out of his old pickup truck wearing a simple navy jacket. A security guard looked at the truck and then at Daniel. "You're the rehabilitation consultant?" "Yes." The guard looked skeptical. Daniel smiled. "I get that a lot." Inside the mansion, Richard Carter waited for him. Richard looked Daniel up and down. "You're younger than I expected." Daniel nodded. "And you're richer than I expected." Richard didn't smile. "I've hired some of the best doctors in the world." "I know." "Then why should I listen to you?" Daniel looked directly into his eyes. "Because I'm not here to promise your daughter a miracle." Richard's expression changed. "Then what are you here for?" "To help her fight." Richard remained silent. Daniel continued. "If she can recover, we'll help her recover. If she can't, we'll help her build a life she can still be proud of." Richard stared at him. Then he asked the question that had been haunting him for years. "Can you make her walk?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Richard's jaw tightened. "Then you're wasting my time." Daniel turned toward the hallway. "Maybe. But I'm not afraid to tell her the truth." He walked into Emily's room. She sat beside the window in her wheelchair, staring outside. Daniel didn't introduce himself with a long speech. He simply pulled a chair beside her. "Hi." Emily didn't respond. "My name is Daniel." "I know. You don't look happy to see me." "I've seen a lot of people like you." Daniel smiled slightly. "People like me? People who think they can fix me." Daniel shook his head. "I can't fix you." Emily finally looked at him. "Then why are you here?" "To help." She laughed bitterly. "Everyone says that." "I know. You don't know anything." Daniel looked at her. "You're right." That answer surprised her. Daniel continued. "I don't know what it's like to wake up every morning and wonder if your body will ever feel normal again. I don't know what it's like to watch people look at you differently. But I know what it's like to be afraid." Emily looked away. Daniel didn't push. He stood up. "Tomorrow morning, I'll be here at 8. I'm not training." That's okay. What will you do? Wait. Emily frowned. For how long? As long as it takes. The next morning, Daniel arrived at 8. Emily didn't come. At 9, he was still there. At 10, he was still there. At noon, Richard found him sitting in the garden. You're wasting your time, Richard said. Daniel looked at him. Maybe. She doesn't want help. Maybe she doesn't want the kind of help she's been offered. What does that mean? Daniel pointed toward the mansion. Everyone keeps telling her to walk. Nobody is asking her what she's afraid of. Richard became silent. That afternoon, Daniel returned to Emily's room. He didn't ask her to stand. Instead, he asked one question. What do you miss the most? Emily looked confused. What? Before the accident. What do you miss? She thought for a moment. Running. Daniel nodded. Anything else? Dancing. He nodded again. Anything else? She looked toward the window. Being independent. Daniel smiled. Good. Good. Now we know what we're fighting for. The training began slowly. Not with walking. Not with standing. With breathing. With sitting correctly. With controlling small movements. With learning to trust her body again. The first week was terrible. Emily became angry. She shouted. She cried. She threw a resistance band across the room. This is pointless. Daniel didn't shout back. He simply picked up the band. Again. I can't. Again. I said I can't. Daniel looked at her. I heard you. He paused. But I didn't hear you say you won't. Emily stared at him. That sentence stayed in her mind. The next morning, she tried again. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Daniel's methods were different from the specialists. He didn't treat Emily like a patient. He treated her like a person. When she failed, he didn't pity her. When she succeeded, he didn't exaggerate it. And when she became frustrated, he reminded her that progress wasn't always visible. One evening, Emily asked him why he was so patient. Daniel looked at the floor. I have a son. What does that have to do with me? Everything. He showed her a photograph of Noah. He was born 8 years ago. After I left the Navy, I thought I had everything figured out. Then I lost my wife. Suddenly, I had a little boy looking at me like I was supposed to know how to fix everything. Emily looked at the photograph. Could you? Daniel smiled sadly. No. What did you do? I stayed. Emily's eyes became wet. Daniel continued. Sometimes that's what helping someone means. You can't fix everything. You just refuse to leave. Months passed. Then one morning, something unexpected happened. Emily was practicing balance between two parallel bars. Daniel stood several feet away. Don't hold the bars. Emily shook her head. I can't. You can. What if I fall? I'll catch you. What if you don't? I will. Emily slowly released one hand. Then the other. Her body trembled. Her knees shook. Daniel stayed completely still. Look at me, he said. Emily looked at him. Not the floor. She took a breath. Again. Then it happened. Emily stood. Not for long. Not perfectly. But she stood. Richard was watching from the doorway. He covered his mouth with his hand. Tears filled his eyes. For 3 years, he had dreamed of seeing his daughter on her feet. And now she was standing. Emily looked terrified. Then she smiled. I did it. Daniel smiled. You did. Richard rushed into the room. Emily. She turned toward him. Her father cried openly as he hugged her. For the first time in years, Emily felt hope. But the story wasn't over. The next morning, the doctors arrived. They were impressed by Emily's progress, but one of them questioned Daniel's methods. You're taking unnecessary risks. Daniel remained calm. We're following a controlled program. You have no medical license. No. Richard stepped forward. He doesn't need one to train her. The doctor looked at Richard. With respect, Mr. Carter, you're letting emotion control your judgment. Richard looked at his daughter. No. For the first time in 3 years, I'm letting my daughter have a voice. Emily looked at the doctor. I want Daniel to continue. The doctor sighed. Then the decision is yours. That evening, Richard approached Daniel. I owe you an apology. Daniel shook his head. You don't owe me anything. I was wrong about you. Daniel smiled. Most people are. Richard laughed for the first time in months. Then he asked something unexpected. Why did you really leave the Navy? Daniel's smile disappeared. I lost someone. Richard waited. My closest teammate. Daniel looked toward the garden. I had to make a decision during a mission. I made the decision I believed was right. But someone didn't come home. Richard said nothing. I spent years believing that if I had been faster, stronger, smarter, maybe he would have survived. Emily, who had quietly entered the room, heard him. She spoke softly. You're blaming yourself for something you couldn't control. Daniel looked at her. Maybe. She smiled. You taught me not to do that. Daniel looked away. For the first time, Emily realized that the man helping her had been fighting his own invisible battle. She wasn't the only one who needed to heal. And something changed between them. Daniel continued training Emily. Emily continued improving. She moved from parallel bars to a walker. From a walker to short unsupported steps. Then came the day she walked across the rehabilitation room without assistance. Richard stood at one end. Daniel stood at the other. Emily took one step. Then another. Then another. Her father cried. Daniel smiled. Emily reached the end and hugged him. Thank you. Daniel shook his head. You did the work. You gave me a reason to try. Several months later, Richard organized a charity event in Emily's honor. Hundreds of people attended. Business leaders, athletes, doctors, celebrities, and reporters filled the ballroom. Emily walked onto the stage. The crowd stood and applauded. She looked toward her father. Then toward Daniel and Noah. Daniel stood at the back of the room, trying not to attract attention. Emily took the microphone. For 3 years, I thought my life was over. The room became silent. I thought my wheelchair was the definition of who I was. She paused. I thought my father had to save me. Richard wiped a tear from his eye. But then someone taught me something different. She looked at Daniel. He didn't promise me a miracle. Daniel lowered his eyes. He didn't tell me everything would be easy. Emily smiled. He simply told me that I wasn't finished. The audience applauded. Emily continued. And that's what I want everyone here to understand. Sometimes the person who saves you isn't the person who makes your problem disappear. Sometimes they're the person who stays beside you while you learn how to face it. The room erupted in applause. Richard walked onto the stage. He hugged his daughter. Then he turned toward Daniel. Come up here. Daniel shook his head.